Slide.
Why write poetry?
Poem is done. Like, what was the point here? I also don't know where this poem is going.
Poetry's very love-hate.
The worst possible thing is them just saying no.
Good morning, good evening, afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff with the Verses Live, the weekly poetry show where we talk all things poetry, things to help you elevate your game, especially for underrepresented voices. And we are not in our normal location. Thanks to Third as always, for being willing to host us, but just some things came out today, so we weren't able to be at a normal spot. And it's also a solo show today, just me, Ajane, and Matthias, our co-host, are celebrating the day. So good for them. But today we're really kind of targeting people who are interested in getting their first book of poetry out into the world. And you're like, man, I want to do it. I want to do anything that I can to get the book out there. But it is something that you may not necessarily want to rush into. And there's just some quick things that I wanted to mention today. I don't think we'll be spending a whole lot of time on today's stream. But also, if you have a book of poetry out there, if you are working on a collection, if you have a manuscript that you're trying to finish, let me know in the chat. Or if you're watching this on the replay, in the comments. That way we can kind of just discuss, talk shop a little bit. But I do think there's lots of things that you want to be considering before you get that collection out there, because the first book, I mean, you only get one first book. So you want to make sure that when it gets out there right. And I think there's some things that you can be considering before that actually happens to help ensure that your book already has success. You know, a while ago, we talked with a self-published author, Dante Woods, who talked about his process of getting his book out. Now, granted, he's working with nonfiction, not with poetry, but he mentioned a lot of things that I think are very beneficial for also poets to be considering, one of which being audience. And if you're putting a book out into the world, then, you know, what's your motivation for doing that? Because if it is to get your book into the hands of other people, then you might already want to be considering, well, who exactly are those people? Knowing your audience, knowing who are the people that are most likely going to be getting the book. Because if you're just relying on strangers, complete strangers, to be purchasing your book, that's a very tough feat. So there's some things that you can already start doing now to begin building your audience. You can definitely refer to, again, that video with Dante for even more tips, but some things that you already want to kind of be considering or trying to get involved in your poetry community, wherever you're located. So for instance, if there's shows happening, if there's an open mic, even just maybe there's a local journal or a local press where you are, I would definitely be trying to reach out to them, and not just one time, but repeatedly. And there's also some etiquette involved with this too. For instance, if you're going to an open mic, then one important consideration is that, you know, you don't necessarily have to stay for this whole show, but trying to stay for a considerate portion of the time. That's always going to be a good look. And also just kind of reaching out to people, start supporting other poets or other writers, because this is how you start to build your network. And a lot of people are putting out books without really already having that network in place. So then they get copies of their book, but then they have no one really to sell to. And that is certainly going to be a problem. And this also ties into, it's not really a second point, but related to that point, is also trying to understand why are you trying to get a book out? What is your purpose? I think some people just have the idea that, oh, well, I'm a writer, so I need to have a book out. And that's not necessarily true. Like, what are you hoping to gain by having the book out? Is it just, you know, even like a vanity thing? You're just like, oh, I just think it looks good. Or is it something that, oh, you really feel like whatever you're putting out into the world can really benefit people? Is it something that a lot of people have been kind of asking you about, so you're trying to meet like a demand? Is it that maybe it's a requirement for a next level engagement that you're interested in? For instance, if you're interested in doing like public speaking, if you're interested in being involved in panels, if you're interested in being in different fellowships or retreats or different even programs, you know, having that book on your resume, especially depending on where that book comes from, can be a very big benefit for you. So there certainly can be advantages to that. Another thing you want to be considering with first books, though, is that, especially with regards to where you're looking to get published, like I mentioned earlier, you only get one first book. So if you're trying to get a book published, there are many different contests that you may want to consider, some more prestigious than others. And these contests are only open to first books. So if you just have like a friend that like, hey, I publish books, I can make copies of your book, that may not be necessarily the best opportunity for you because suddenly your book's out there, and then, well, now you've just missed out on all those competitions and opportunities for money. Also, just even just getting your book rejected by from some places can also help give you an idea of how your book, the in terms of the quality, like, is it missing something? Is it cohesive enough? So that's kind of another thing to consider as well. So I personally don't have a book out right now. It's not just not on my list of goals for the moment. But if I were to get a book published, these are the things that I would be considering first. So, and of course, there's other strategies as well. So, if you have your own take on this, I would love to hear your process as well. But the very first thing I would be looking into, if I was trying to get a book published, the very first thing I would do is I would be trying to get individual poems published. And there's a reason for this. If you get a book published, what's going to happen is those poems from your collection are now unable to be published in most other publications because they're part of your book. So you're really limiting your reach. Whereas, so let's put it this way. So if you're trying to publish a full length book, your page length is usually going to be anywhere from like, 48 is a very small collection, but let's say like 48 to like 110 pages of work, and you publish that. So now all of those poems, whether that's like 20 poems, 30 poems, 50 poems, can now no longer find a home anywhere else. In general, there's always anthologies and things, but in general, it's going to be much more difficult for those places to find a home. Whereas if you had submitted those same 20, 30, 50 poems to journals, I mean, hey, that could have been 30 different publications that your work already could have gotten exposed to. One of the other advantages of this too is that if you're getting published in a journal, that's a vote of support for your work. Editors don't have to publish you. They are swamped. They're getting thousands, or in some cases, hundreds of thousands of poetry submissions, sometimes in very, very short time spans. So by them choosing your work, they're basically giving you a vote of confidence, being like, hey, we like what you're doing. We want to support you. Once you get a large number of those publications from journals, well, this is you're starting to build your network, especially if you stay in touch with those editors, you reach out to them every now and then just to kind of check up on them, because suddenly later on, when your book comes out, you can say, hey, you guys published my work, my poem appeared in this in your journal, and now it's also appearing in my book. I just want to let you know, I want to say thanks. And you never know, because what can happen is then the editors might reach out to you and they'll be like, oh, wow, well, we want to do an article about your book, or we want to put something in our newsletter or put something on our homepage. So suddenly, instead of just having that one book and that's it, no other journal aside from the journal that, or the publication that published your book. Well, if you had, again, 30 public individual publications or something like that, well, now you have 30 different editors you can reach out to when your book comes out and be like, hey, this is coming. Um, can you help me promote this? Or can you let people know if they liked my work, they can find it here. So I don't know about you, but if I can have the choice of like one publication promoting my work or like 30, I would choose 30. And this is again how you can start to build up your network and things like that. So that's the very first step I would really recommend, is try to get some of those individual poems into poetry journals. Start submitting. Um, in case you're interested, there are different, like, quote unquote tiers for poetry journals too. Some are just more prestigious, have a wider readership than others. So that's something I would be considering. In addition to that, it might be time to start, making a business Facebook page or a business Instagram page that is dedicated to your poetry work so then you can update when publications come out. But this goes back also to the first point I mentioned about the community aspect too. You probably don't just want to be focusing on your own work. It's not just me, 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 me. You also need to be involved with other people as well. So it's important, when you're doing those pages and things, to also get involved with other poets that you respect, other poets' work, to start contributing, start having conversations with people, start getting involved. So that way you're not just like posting for your own publications, you're also spreading the wealth when another person has their collection come out or an individual poem come out. What are you doing to support them? So just some things to consider there, and trying to expand your network. And people see that. People do see those things. This is also where the value of attending things like retreats and fellowships is also helpful, because that further expands your network, and that further expands the amount of people who would be interested in your work and may be interested in purchasing your work, but also in helping spread the word about your work as well. The poetry community, it's big, but it's also very small. Everyone kind of knows everybody. So the more you can get involved and start doing that networking. And in fact, a lot of times when you're doing fellowships and retreats, the networking aspect in some ways can be even more important than the actual work itself. It's very, very, there's very much a business aspect to this. So once you have like a sizable number of poems that have been published, you don't need necessarily every single poem in your book to be in a journal. It's something that, the more in general, the better it can be, and just kind of getting your name out there. But it's not necessary to have them all. The next step I would really consider doing would be trying to see if any of these poems fit into a specific theme, and turning those poems into a chapbook. If not, maybe even multiple chapbooks. And the reason for this is, again, if you just publish a chapbook on its own, and in case you don't know, a chapbook is basically basically a small collection of poetry. It's like, it could be like 10 pages, it could be like 30 pages. Once you get over that, you're starting to get in the full length territory in general. But it's just kind of like a short, in general, cohesive collection of poetry. So this is where, again, themes are helpful. If you're like, oh, I have like 5 poems about dogs, well, maybe you can get a couple more. Or if you're like, oh, all my poems are about family, well, maybe you can make a chapbook about that. And again, similar to what I was saying before, like for a full length collection, once you have a chapbook published with poems, in general, it can be difficult to get those individual poems in your chapbook published again. Okay, so this is why you want to make this the second step, not the first step. So, first step, again, individual poems. Second step, try to put all of those poems together into a chapbook. And I would really recommend with that chapbook, this is, again, applying to contests is going to be helpful here. Contests are important in the poetry world because the reality is most people don't know who you are. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't need to be submitting to contests as part of the goal. I mean, the contests are also helpful because that's how most journals are really sustaining themselves. If they didn't do the contests, they really wouldn't have the funding to do a lot of what they do. So by submitting a contest, you are supporting them. Do keep in mind, contests for chapbooks even can be expensive, especially if you're applying to multiple. We've talked about this in previous streams. We talked about this recently with Violetta. But you're probably, if you're submitting to a contest a month or a couple contests a month, you can easily be spending 40, 50, $100 just on contests and things like that a month. So something to consider there. Chapbook fees, though, will be generally less than full length fees for contests, just which makes sense, right? Because chapbooks are a lot shorter. But if you put these collections together in a chapbook and then you submit to a contest and you win, well, now you're starting to get, again, even more recognition for your work, because suddenly, you don't just have a chapbook, you have an award-winning chapbook. And later on, when you get your full length, you can mention that, from the award-winning author or or whatever you call it. And again, the more prestigious the word, the greater the weight that's going to carry. But again, so you've published all your individual poems, you can then put them into a chapbook. And then finally, when you feel like you have enough poems for that full length, Maybe you have multiple chapbooks. Maybe you can compile everything there and add maybe a couple other extra poems and things and put it into your full length collection. So basically, what this allows you to do, this whole strategy, is it allows you to kind of get work published three different times on a kind of like a ladder, kind of on a scale. And each time kind of just take you up a notch. Whereas if again you just publish directly into a full length, then you're missing out on all those other steps that could have helped you build up a bigger audience for your work. So those are just some things I would really be considering if you're trying to get your full length out. Now, some people again, hey, it's 2023. There's so many options out there. I mean, you could get like Chat GPT to write your next poetry collection, right? I don't know how well it would do, but you might be able to find an audience for that. So some people are also going like the self-publishing route, and that's fine to do. But again, you are missing out on some of those opportunities for recognition. Now, some people might embrace that challenge. They'll be like, no, I can hustle. I'm fine with doing all the work myself. I think that's the reason that a lot of people are going for the contests and things like that is because it can be a faster way. There's lots of people every single year that are able to start making a name for themselves in the poetry world by winning those contests. But at the same time, it doesn't guarantee success either, too, right? Because you can win a contest and still remain in obscurity. So just some things to be considering if you're trying to get your first full length of poetry out there. Again, it would be great to hear about your own experiences and suggestions you have for people or your own questions about starting a full length. Also, when you're getting your full length collection out there, just some things, just some general manuscript things. Just check your formatting, make sure you're following the guidelines. Make sure if they're asking for a specific font, you probably want to use that font. It can be helpful, like if you want to be, I don't want to say cute, but if you want to be thorough or show that you really put a lot of time into your work, you may want to consider adding like a cover page that kind of gives them an idea of what you have envisioned, but again, not necessary. Make sure also to check to see, where if they want page numbers, if they want them in a specific place. Make sure that a lot of times for contests, they're going to ask for it blind. So make sure that your name is not located anywhere. Make sure, again, if you've had work published, that you're including an acknowledgments page. Usually that's a later stage process, but it can be helpful even from the beginning to include that. Although some publications may not want that because then they might recognize your work. So definitely, again, read the guidelines. And if you are submitting to a contest, make sure that you you see the judge. They always tell you who the judge is for the work. It's usually not just the journal editor. So read up on who the judge is. Make sure your work's going to be a fit because even if you pass the initial, the initial lineup of like first readers, the judge is going to be the one deciding. And if your style really doesn't mesh with what that judge is doing, like if the judge is doing a lot more lyric poetry and you're going heavy on the narrative, that's not to say it can't do well, but it could be a tricky match moving forward. And yeah, best of luck to you also if you're considering getting your work out there for your first publication. But again, it's also not something that you necessarily have to do. There's so many more ways if you're just doing it to get work out into the world. There are so many ways nowadays, 2023, that you can be doing that, whether through the use of video, through use of social media, or again, just becoming a more active participant in your local poetry community just to start getting involved. So those are some things I would be considering as well in getting your first book. So that's kind of just the quick rundown of my suggestions and things. If you're trying to get your first collection out there, let me know again of your own experiences in the chat or in the comments afterwards. And I'll see you guys next time. I hope you have a good day, good night, good afternoon, and you take care.